Hello and welcome back to my channel. Bonsoir et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this evening I will be doing a rant review, you've been warned, for Semiosis by Sue Burke. Quick little note, I have had to take some medication today, so if I'm a bit slower than usual in my speech, I really apologize, but it's a side effect of the said medication. Yes, a rant review, though I'm going to be very salty because, wow, this was bad, disappointing, and annoying. So Semiosis is basically a colonization slash first contact story. You have a bunch of human beings who decide to leave Earth because there is much conflict there and environmental degradation, and they want to start afresh on a new planet. On said planet, there are a myriad of animal-like and plant-like alien species, but what's special about said life forms is that, especially with the plants, a lot of them are sentient to greater or lesser degrees. One of the plants is called a rainbow bamboo, not an actual bamboo, but I guess, it's supposed to look like a bamboo, and it is particularly intelligent. It's not really a spoiler because you get to that information fairly quickly in the book. That's the base premise. I basically thought I was going to get something akin to Children of Time, but with plants. That's not what I got at all. This was an epic failure in that regard. And what's more, but this is more a question of personal preference, to be fair, I thought this was going to be a traditional novel in format. It's not really that. I mean, the way it is structured, you basically have 6 chapters. Each chapter looks at a generation of colonists and then moves on to the next. So the second chapter takes place about 30 years after the first, the third 30 additional years after that, then 100, and then the 3 last chapters all take place within the span of about 2 years, 106 years after the initial settlement of the planet Pax by human beings. So it reads more like a collection of short stories which are linked chronologically, thematically, and plot-wise, which was a bit jarring, not at all to my personal preference. Some people might not mind that as much, okay, but the thing is, that also means you never really spend that much time with any of the characters in any given generation. Add to that the character work itself was abysmally bad, but I'll get back to that in a minute. So yeah, it was a very disjointed book with, I guess, a main central plot, but not really. I mean, there is more of a straightforward plot in the last 3 to 4 chapters of the book. I think I said there were 6, maybe there were 7. See, I hated this so much I can't even remember. Should also quickly add that I'm not going to be that careful about spoilers, since I personally thought this was shite. I don't really care about spoiling it because I would not recommend to any of you that you pick this up. But please, let's all keep in mind, it is my personal opinion. When I said this book was bad, that is shorthand for me saying I personally thought and found it bad. Alright? We're all agreed here. The writing was bad too. Like, the writing itself was straight up bad. I felt it was clunky, choppy. I felt like I was basically tripping over sentences and paragraphs, and I was like, is this a me thing? But then I went and looked up some more negative reviews of this book on Goodreads, and other people commented upon this, that the writing was barely serviceable. There are several times where a person will repeat the same word, like, it was really, really, really distressing, or a woman says, I was not feeling tired, and I was like, what does that even mean? So was this a problem with editing or what? I don't know, but so the writing was bad. There are a few science-based facts about plant physiology, plant biochemistry interspersed throughout the book, which are interesting. Problem is, they are very cold, do not mesh with the rest of the story, the world building. They're just fact drops that don't actually come together to create a cogent whole. So that was annoying. I mean, I found it interesting because, again, I have a bit of background in biology, including botany, but I would imagine to someone who isn't as science-versed, this would read as very, very boring. I will say though, there are technically multiple points of views. I tend to like this in my fiction, but once again, this is simply because each chapter takes a look at a different generation of colonists, and so for each generation of colonists, you get like one main character or a couple of main characters. You don't stay with them for any significant length of time, you don't really get to know them, you don't get attached to them. I didn't give a single crap about any of the characters, and that's also because character work itself was shite, which I'll get to in a second now. So, yeah, multiple points of view, but whatever. The only one that was remotely interesting is that of this rainbow bamboo. Yes, you get the point of view of a plant character, and that was a big problem as well, because said plant character just basically read as a human being in bamboo shape, not as an actually alien entity or an organism that is fundamentally different from something like a human being or even, a somewhat related mammalian organism. But okay, I'm gonna get to the character work now. The character work was bad as well. At best, you had boring characters. At worst, you had a bunch of idiotic assholes running around like immature frat bros. I was like, what the hell is it with this character work? In fact, in general, several times as I was reading this, I was going, what the hell is this? I was so freaking annoyed because there's so many little bits that grated on my nerves for several different reasons, including the world building, including the lack of feeding, including cringy ass bits to do with sexism or weird pseudo-bestiality. I'll get to that in a second. So I was like, what is this? What am I reading? The core premise of this book is that you have a bunch of idealists back on Earth who are sick and tired of all the war, conflict, and environmental destruction going on planet Earth. Fair enough. So they decide to team up, whip up a colonization scheme and, go to this alien planet called Pax. And their goal is to set up a pacifist utopian society. There's a, constitution to the Commonwealth of Pax, which states that the main goals are the pursuit of happiness, freedom, joy, harmonious living, yada yada yada. But then all the human characters are asshats, assholes, morons with zero planning skills, zero forethought to how difficult it's going to be to survive on an alien planet, and I'm gonna delve deeper into that in the world building section. So I was like, what am I supposed to make of these stupid characters? I don't care about any of them. What's weirder and what was particularly infuriating to me is that the male characters are also stereotypically dude bro-y. There's so many little sexist or sexist adjacent comments in the minds of some of the main male characters. The third chapter is told from the point of view of a guy who thinks about fucking all the women around him all the time. Which, fine, you can as an author choose to depict a male character who's a womanizer. Fair enough. But I was like, supposedly all the humans selected for the colonization mission had to pass psych evals, had to be evaluated for their knowledge base, their sets of skills, their levels of agreeableness, mental stability. You'd think things like xenophobia, racism, and sexism would be filtered out by that process. So you've got this dude who's in charge of domesticating animals randomly thinking, oh, that woman, she's got really nice tits. I wonder how they would feel in my hands. And now, there's a recurring problem with fertility among these colonists. Again, major problem with the world building, which I am going to get to in a second. So he's basically fathered 3/4 of the children in the colony. So he's had sex with a lot of the women and he really enjoys that. Now, don't get me wrong, he's not a misogynist in the sense that he wants to rape women or that he's violent towards them, but it was just, what the hell is this? What am I reading right now? In another chapter, you've got a bunch of dude characters commenting upon the fact that women are more interested in people rather than things. And that's just straight up the kind of stuff you'd read in Evo Psych essays about neurosexism, and I was like, what the hell? This was written by a woman too! Women can be sexist, don't get me wrong, but I was like, if I wanted this, I'd go back to reading classic SF from the 60s and 70s, and at least in those books, I'd get interesting scientific concepts and world building. Like, even in freaking Ringworld, where the female characterization was abysmal, well, there was the Ringworld, which was pretty damn cool, and the Pearson's Puppeteers. So I'm like, I don't need to read this shit in a novel that was written in 2018. Like, what the hell? I was reminded of Anne McCaffrey a bit, but even with the Pen Chronicles, the world building was better done. The dragons were freaking awesome. There was redeeming crap about those books despite the cringy gender dynamics and lack of consent dynamics. I mean, there's also a random punitive rape in chapter 2, so again, these people were supposed to be so freaking pacifistic. I wondered for half a second, is this supposed to be a massive exercise in irony? Is this supposed to be satire? Like, what? And for the little bit of characterization you get, it flip-flops around all the freaking time. You have a character in chapter 5 who is terrified of this secondary alien species you discover, and there's a whole plot with them, and he's horrified by some of their behavior and says, I'm never gonna be interested in these glassmakers again, I'm disgusted, I'm gonna stop playing the flute. But then, like, 3 months later, there's an attempt at peacemaking with these aliens, and he's like, well, I'm gonna try and help out, and he becomes buddies with the glassmakers. And I'm like, you were freaking traumatized, violently traumatized 10 pages ago, so much so that you decided to abandon your passion for music, but now you buddies with them. And then, supposedly, the hook for this freaking book were the sentient plants. So you have a main rainbow bamboo character called Stevland. Stevland is basically a human being in tree form. He's a glorified dryad is what he is. I mean, I say it. It's a glorified dryad. It is not, in any sense of the word, a truly alien character. There's nothing that different between its psychology and that of a human or human-like creature. It decides to develop a humor root, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean for a plant. It also has weird, I mean, this goes back to the world building, but it acquires knowledge at a pace that's just not believable. It's basically a Gary Stu in plant form. It just learns things like that. It can understand animals' biochemistry again like that. It can synthesize chemical compounds to help with their nutrition, with their cognitive abilities, like that. It's more akin to magic than anything else. There's nothing particularly science fiction-y about it. There is never any kind of attempt at an explanation for how sentience would even work in that kind of plant-like organism. It can just grow eyes. It can basically hear things. It wants to grow organs that would allow it to speak. But again, it can just do all these things out of the blue. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but even if plants on Earth can, well, detect light, obviously they're photosynthesizing organisms, they don't just fucking grow eyes. See, this is also another thing that pissed me off. One of the botanist characters at the very beginning of the book says, plants can actually see. And I was like, there's so much that is so ridiculously oversimplified about that statement. You can't just say plants can see. That doesn't mean anything. So yeah, Stevland is a magical plant humanoid demigod that can do anything. Nothing about it was credible or believable. The other plant characters, I mean, there are lots of different plants that are mentioned, and I'm sorry, but one thing that just really freaking killed it for me, there's a conflict, like I said, with another alien species, and there's an alien pineapple plant that communicates with this rainbow bamboo, and I swear to freaking gods, the pineapples say, oh yes, we're going to cooperate with you, the big bamboozler. The bamboozler. Why in fuck's name would an alien pineapple know how to use the word bamboozle, which is not even an expression universal to human beings? It's a specific slang expression among, what, some Northern Americans? Why the fuck would an alien pineapple know how to use that? That was so bloody ridiculous. You know, sometimes things are so bad that they're funny. In this case, it was so bad that it wasn't funny in the slightest. It was freaking ridiculous and completely world and credibility breaking for me. Continuing on with the parade of shit. So the world building. Oh my god, was the world building bad. You can't just take a random bunch of cool plant facts, throw them at a piece of paper to see what's gonna stick, and just magically expect it to create a cogent, interesting, sensical narrative and world full of interesting science-based concepts to explore in science fiction. It does not work like that. It might be a necessary condition. It is most definitely not a sufficient one. Again, friendly reminder, not meaning to attack the author, know nothing about her, wish her all the best. I'm talking about the book here. I'm judging the book. Can we take a moment first to talk about how laughably ridiculous the basic colonization scheme was? I have never come across such a badly planned colonization mission in my entire life. I was like, you people were morons. Since you never get any significant length of time with any of the main characters, you don't get their backstories, you don't really get the backstory for the basic plot. Presumably, Earth is plagued by war, environmental degradation. The main character in the first chapter is of Mexican descent. He, lightly alludes to war in Mexico over, food crops, probably maize, I would assume, because that is an actual real life problem, the loss of maize biodiversity in Mexico, which is something which could have been explored in this book, mind you, but of course it wasn't. And so it's explained that a bunch of people were funded by, a rich kid to come up with this space mission to colonize a foreign planet. But I was like, so were these just a bunch of Jeff Bezoses that decided, to whip up a mission on the fly, go to space exploration R us with the R backwards, and go into space half-cocked? Is that what happened? Is this a commentary on the arrogance of the 0.1% who think they can do anything they want with the amount of money they have? I mean, I don't know. That was never made clear. Because this space mission, not only do they get to the wrong planet, they basically expect to find edible food on said planet, like no contingency plan with, frozen crops. They go out with 50 people, so again, no factoring potential accidents, loss of life. There's no security detail. There's 2 botanists for the entire project. The lack of scientists is laughably ridiculous. The lack of contingency plans was laughably ridiculous. Basically, half or 3/4 of the landing pods crash. A lot of people die. The equipment fails after a few months. Most of the tech just doesn't work. Everything goes wrong. Somehow they manage to survive, despite that. Then there are 30 people left. Half of the frozen embryos and sperm gets fucked, basically, but they still manage to, trudge along, reproduce, but somehow there aren't massive issues with inbreeding, because that makes a ton of sense. The second generation of people born on this planet, which has a higher gravity than Earth, magically already born with denser bones and shorter statures, because that's totally how evolution and genetics work, right? Another little fun detail, it's mentioned at least 4 different times that there is no bioavailable iron on Pax. Yet, the animals the humans domesticate and farm on Pax have iron-rich meat. This magical bamboo tree humanoid god thing requires iron to function well. Could you explain to me how a plant would evolve needing iron on a planet where bioavailable iron isn't a thing? That makes a ton of sense. Like I said, the humans mentioned several times that they have to go foraging for freaking meteorites to get their iron requirements. Where are the rampant levels of anemia? Because that makes sense once again. Someone who isn't as versed in science would have picked up on this probably, but I'm like, to me this is basic shit. Basic shit that should have been corrected upon a single reread of the first draft. Like, what the fuck? Another thing which is, presented as something that could have been really neat and something which could have been elaborated upon, the native life forms of Pax apparently are RNA-based, not DNA-based. So, that could explain higher levels of mutations, accelerated levels of evolution. Nothing is done with that. It's presented in the first chapter, dropped, and never picked up again. okay, whatever. Like I said, there's never any kind of proposition as to how, plant sentience would work. Stevland is basically a human being in the shape of a bamboo. There's also the fact that a bunch of alien plants are name dropped and are given Terran plant names, so you don't even know what they're supposed to be. There's no kind of elaborate descriptions of all these fancy alien plants. Oh yeah, the gravity is higher on Pax than on Earth, so there aren't many flighted animals, but, tree-like organisms grow very tall, so again, that makes perfect sense. You've got a doctor proposing to give antibiotics to someone who's suffering from a viral infection. Again, basic shit that should have been corrected upon the first reread, upon editing, what have you. Lots of alien animals are mentioned, never described to any kind of, extent, so I couldn't really picture any of them apart from things called Fippo cats and Fippo lions. But then, as you advance in the book, other animals were name dropped: dragons, bears, wolves, hunting spiders. What do they look like? Who the fuck knows? The ecosystem of this planet isn't fleshed out at all, apart from this rainbow bamboo, who's basically a magical being more than anything else. There's a secondary alien species, which was fine. I didn't give a crap by that time. The plant, again, this stupid Stevland plant apparently knew the concepts of good and evil, and I'm like, what the fuck does good and evil even look like to a plant? It also says it doesn't really understand the cyclical nature of animals, but plants are even more cyclical in a way than animals. It also kept repeating that animals are very repetitive creatures. Plants are even more so. Also, it at the same time understood the higher laws of thermodynamics, but couldn't get beyond a simple dichotomy between animals and plants, when there are fungal organisms on that planet and also things that are akin to slime molds. And the animal-plant divide is a false dichotomy that's very typical of early human scientific thinking. It is not applicable today when you have any kind of basic understanding about, cladistic and evolution, yet that super intelligent plant that keeps tooting its own horn about how more intelligent it is than human beings can transcend that dichotomy, but like I said, at the same time understood higher thermodynamics, understood all of its internal mechanisms of energy conversion. It talks all the time about its internal biochemistry. Like, who talks like that? If us human beings don't think like that on a regular basis, I sincerely doubt that a plant would. It's always going off about its levels of adenosine triphosphate, and I'm like, seriously, you're waxing poetic about your ATP levels, mate? Like, what the fuck? Sure, I enjoy me a good meme about how mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells, or jokes about the Krebs cycle on Trust Me, I'm a freaking biologist, but that's not how I think regularly day to day, and I sincerely doubt that any humans really do. Maybe, a few biochem nerds that are really freaking into it, but even then, it's a stretch. There was no true time or effort dedicated to fleshing out this alien ecosystem. I hate to compare this to another work of fiction, but when you compare it to these two, Children of Time and Children of Rune, this was garbage. Absolute garbage. Children of Time was magnificent in its mastery of speculative evolution and creating truly alien intelligences and forms of sentience in animals which are somewhat related to human beings in the grander scheme of things. But this was ridiculous. And I didn't care because no characterization, no real plot to speak of. And then to top off this pile of shit, at least 4 different freaking times, you have to read about the fact that human beings are sensitive to the pheromones of, one of the domesticated alien animals the human colonists managed to adopt into their society. There are things called Fippo lions, which I guess are supposed to look like green-furred kangaroos, whatever. They secrete pheromones, and it makes men hard. That is totally something I wanted to read about 4 different freaking times. Or how about a female Fippo lion wanted to mate with one of the main human characters. That's the pseudo bestiality I mentioned earlier. Putting aside the fact that it's highly unlikely an alien animal's pheromones would even interact with our own physiology, why did I need to read about this? It was just gratuitously gross, I guess. And a section on themes. not really necessary because there are no actual themes to speak of in this book. There are seedlings, yes, seeds of ideas in there, planted in a barren wasteland because none of them go anywhere, none of them flourish into something actually interesting or thoughtful enough to care about. You could have had commentary on, well, non-human sentience like you do in Children of Time. That went nowhere. Fail. You could have had commentary on non-human communication. That never went anywhere. Fail. I mean, I guess, for the fun of it, you've got bat-like creatures that say words and humans can somehow understand them, but there's no explanation given for that because why would there be? And Fippo cats are described as being somewhat intelligent, but whatever. And like I said, this Stevland bamboo at first tries to communicate in colored flowers and scents. Could have stuck to that. That would have made it 1,000 times more interesting. But no, after a while, it just learns how to write on its freaking bark. Whoopee freaking do. And it starts talking basically like a human when it's not monologuing about its internal biochemistry. Could have had commentary on, I don't know, the setting up of a utopian society, the founding of a new society. That didn't go anywhere. Fail because there were so many contradictions with the main characters who were like, assholes, dude bros, morons. I mean, you'd assume that among a lot of characters supposed to be scientists, you'd have somewhat high levels of intelligence, but no, they were morons. Like I said, supposedly there were selection criteria to do with psychometrics, including agreeableness and mental stability, but clearly that was a massive fail because lots of assholes, a punitive rape, people punching each other, whatever. Should have had, I don't know, meaningful commentary on the impacts of survival on human nature and human society. It was basic shit once again, so again, fail. And, well, I mean, like I said, there's the introduction of a secondary alien species, but in the end, they're basically enslaved, they're forcefully domesticated, assimilated. That's ethically questionable, but nothing is made of it. It's completely brushed aside, and everyone lived happily ever after, supposedly, so, again, fail. So in conclusion, this is the worst book I've read in a very long while. I can't even remember the last time I read something comparably bad. The Power I read in 2020 was really bad. Stories of Your Life and Others were really bad, but there were a couple of stories in there which were actually decent enough. God Emperor was a massive disappointment, but honestly not as bad as this. So that should tell you the level of bad this was to me. This was a 3 out of 10 for me. And I'm being generous with those 3 points. The world building was shite. The science was, at best, like I said, cold facts just name-dropped on a page without any meaningful or interesting whole coalescing out of them. The character work was shite, with boring, stupid, borderline sexist characters. There was no plot to speak of. I mean, yeah, there was a bit of a plot towards the end. Nothing that tied the whole thing together. It was bare bones. It's the most ridiculous colonization scheme I've ever come across in a work of fiction as well. So that was borderline funny, I guess, in a way, in an ironic sort of way. And even the writing was bad, at the very least subpar, clunky, choppy, needed some serious editing. I was like, what the hell? And there were all these cringy bits like a random rape, because why not? Random Flintstone level gender stereotyping. You get into the head of a character who thinks about fucking all the women of his village all the time. Whoopee freaking do. You've got humans, getting erections because they sniff the pheromones of an alien animal, because that's always something you want to read about. Then you have alien pineapples using the word bamboozler because that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, an alien bamboo plant who's basically magical and not science fiction-y at all. A failure of epic proportions. That being said, up until now in 2021, I've only read decent to good to excellent books, so I'm not going to complain. This is the first Rant review of the year. It's the first Rant review since the review I did for God Emperor of Dune back in November, so that's about 6 months. So, that's not bad. Thus concludes my first Rant review of the year. A very, very salty and borderline angry rant review because, like I said, this was, for me, of course, a dumpster fire of garbage. This was the author's debut novel, I believe, so I want to say I'm a big enough person to potentially give another book by her a try, but I don't really want to. I can't be asked. But so many books to read and so little time, so no, I'm not going to be wasting it on anything else by this author. I hope you found it somewhat entertaining, as I tend to find rant reviews entertaining. Informative. Obviously, I would definitely not recommend you pick this up, but it has worked for other readers, so you know, you be the judge of that. You know yourselves better than I do, so maybe this will be right up your alley. And funnily enough, you know, this was going to be a dual review next week with interference thrown in, but that wasn't going to be in the cards, I guess, so you're getting this review early. I hope you will have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. I hope you take good care of yourselves, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye-bye.